Welcome to episode 36 of the NORMLESS podcast. This is Patrick Monti.
It's a pleasure to have you on, Patrick. Thanks for giving up your time today, and congratulations for the birth of your first child. Must be an exciting time.
Yeah. Thank you, mate. Thanks for having me on. It's been exciting and a whirlwind and sleepless and there's probably a myriad of adjectives you can use for how we're feeling at the moment. But it's been a pretty incredible few weeks. We're just adjusting to what the new normal is for us at home and trying to fit everything in around that.
Yeah, yet to experience it myself, but labour of love. I'm sure a lot of sleepless nights, but you wouldn't give that away for the world, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. You really wouldn't change it. It's amazing how your perspective sort of shifts. And if you had told us a month ago that 6 hours in 2-hour broken blocks of sleep was a good night, I would have been telling you you're kidding yourself. So it is amazing how quickly you adapt and you adjust when there really is no choice. You've got to raise the thing and do it right. So it's amazing how instinctual it becomes.
And so how's it kind of changed your marathon running? We'll get into some of the events you've done and some of the amazing times which you've been able to do recently in the last year or so over in London and the Melbourne marathons. But lately, have you kind of tapered off training, or are you trying to adjust to new kind of training regime around now having this full-time job on your hands?
It's been interesting. I mean, traditionally, I'm pretty. My partner Phoebe would say inflexible when it comes to training. So it's been an interesting adjustment period for me because I think inherently marathon running is a pretty selfish endeavor, just due to the time it takes and what it takes out of you. So it's been really interesting for me and a bit of a growth period in terms of just trying to let go of a little bit of control and let go of a little bit of my need to stick to the program and my need to sort of do it all. So it's been, my last marathon was in Vienna in April, and I was very much looking at that as sort of a big, not a last hurrah, but sort of really wanted to go all in on that and try and knock out a good time to release a bit of pressure on myself, so I didn't feel like I was still looking for the next race or the next time or whatever it is. So it has been an adjustment, but I've been pleasantly surprised with how I've been able to fit it in. I think we've been really lucky with how Oliver's been sleeping and all that sort of stuff. So it's given me a bit of time here and there just to get my running in and keep a pretty regular schedule, which I think both Phoebe and myself are pretty routine orientated people. So it definitely helps us when we have a routine, which everyone is quick to remind us that it can be thrown out at any minute with a newborn. So we're still sort of waiting for that to happen.
Yeah, I think it's probably a commonality among a lot of athletes at that top echelon, trying to relinquish a bit of control once you've had a child, but it must be a big learning curve too, I guess, working out how you're going to periodize your training now, and especially around what you're doing with Up There Athletics, which would be interesting to talk about. So you're co-owner for Up There Athletics. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing with Up There Athletics? And I understand there's some really exciting initiatives on the horizon there.
Yeah, so we Up There Athletics is it'd be about I think off the top of my head, it'd be 3 years this year that the store's been open, the physical store. So we're specialty run store in the CBD in Melbourne, and the way the store sort of came about is we operate another store called Up There Store, which is just a menswear and sneaker store without the running component. And then we sort of identified a bit of a grey area in the market of people that are getting into running and enjoy the technology of the shoes and the apparel and all that sort of stuff. And there's this real crossover of people that like to exercise and like to run, but also like to look good and feel good when they're doing it. And there was a myriad of sort of brands popping up that were sort of established themselves in that fashion running space. Some premium brands, some sort of higher priced items, and so that was the sort of opportunity that we had identified. And I think Melbourne itself has got a pretty unique running culture itself. I think once you've been here and you've been to sort of some of the other major cities in the world that do have running cultures, it does live up to some of the international ones. So we're a specialty run store. We stock all the big brands, and then we sort of pride ourselves on introducing new brands into the Australian market. And I'd say we probably specialise over the last 12 months in specialty apparel from overseas, from the UK, the US, and Europe. And it's sort of, we've introduced a bunch of brands to the Australian market that haven't been accessible. They've been accessible for consumers to buy here, but not accessible for people to try on. And when you're paying a substantial amount for something, it's nice to go and touch and feel it and try it on and see if it's going to work, particularly when you're running. You might be running for an hour plus in these garments, so you want to make sure they fit right and they do the right thing. You don't want to have to deal with sending them back overseas if they're not right, and all that sort of stuff. So we've been super fortunate to have the trust of a lot of those brands and to introduce them to our market here, and we've seen great success in that area of the business. And then the super shoe industry is just sort of blown up along with the running industry. So that's another massive component of it.
Yeah, it's grown so much since COVID. There's been this massive boom. You've seen all these run clubs popping up. I guess you've seen the emergence of all these different technologies, as you mentioned, like carbon plates put in the running shoes. I guess since COVID, even for myself, I had caught a little bit of that bug when we went into lockdown with gyms closing, and their alternatives were, home-based resistance training with bands or dumbbells, home-based gym, whatever you could get your hands on, or just lacing up a pair of shoes, going for a run, going for a walk, going to the playground. And I think during that period, that was when I got into a little bit of distance running, and I did a half marathon, a marathon myself last year. And I was having a bit of a laugh because I recently listened to a podcast you're on, and you're talking about how the average global time for a marathon is around 4.5 hours. And I was kind of that, like 4 hours, 50 minutes or so, but I was running at about 107 kilos. And then I think listening to your story and hearing about how you conquered it in 2.5 hours, I think once you do anything like of that nature, it really puts in perspective how massive an achievement it is for someone like yourself to run a marathon in 2.5 hours. So roughly what kind of average speed would you have been running for that London marathon that you recently, I think it was about May last year that you did the 2:31. What's your kind of average pace, just to put things in perspective for the listener?
I think off the top of my head, it's about sort of 3:34-ish a kilometre. I'm not 100% sure on the kilometre per hour pace, which might help some people if they run on treadmills and whatnot. But about 3:34 is the average.
And so I guess with your background in design and media and partnering with coming on board with Up There Athletics as co-owner, and initially in the start, you're working in the retail side of things. And then, so coming in and now as co-owner, is this part of your role, I guess, the design and the graphic visual element of the brand? And I guess how beneficial is it that you have that element of expertise with running and understanding the science of running, the practicalities of what works in theory, but also when you're on the road, versus the marketing side of things and the visual appeal for people who are buying the products? How much of a, I guess, benefit has that been for you and the brand?
Yeah, I think it's massively beneficial. So I take care of all the design and sort of the creative direction of the brand, which we're still reasonably small. So it's nice to sort of have that control and have the the autonomy to be able to make the brand and the store sort of look and feel how we want, and we're pretty nimble in being able to chop and change that sort of stuff. But I think there's sort of no greater strength than being involved in the running community, in the running world, to know, what runners are looking for at the end of the day. I think you really have to be plugged into the community and be hearing what people are talking about and what people are wearing. And it's pretty easy to get lost in the brand space of it all. And, the real high level stuff when you're buying product, a year in advance and all that sort of stuff, you can easily sort of lose touch with the people on the ground, the people that are out there running it at 5 a.m. every morning and all that sort of stuff. And I think it's equally as easy to get lost in the elite side of the sport, which, there's a huge number of running podcasts popping up these days, and it's interesting to see where they sort of all land and what landscape they look to cover. And I mean, a lot of them do end up leaning more into the elite side of the sports, but we've seen great success recently with a few that really have gone deep on the recreational side of the sport and really lean into that side of things.
What shoes do you wear? There's Saucony, Adidas, Nike, New Balance. Originally, you say a handful of years back, Nike would be that main brand that would pop up in terms of running shoes. It's quite a competitive market now. What shoes do you wear? And I guess the other question I have is, how do you decide on what stock to actually bring in and sell and advise other individuals on? Because I imagine there's a lot of people that come into your stores and they're all looking for something different out of their running.
Yeah. It's I mean, I'm in a pretty fortunate position where I do get to try pretty much everything. I do have some sort of favorites. I've run my last few marathons in the ASICS Metaspeed Sky series, which is their sort of carbon plated racing shoe. And then I try and sort of rotate the everyday mileage shoes through a bunch of different ones. In Nike have just released their Pegasus 41, which has been a great update. I've always been a fan of the Nike Vomero. Usually always got a pair of On Cloud Monsters in my rotation. So in a very fortunate position that I sort of can rotate through, it could be 7 different shoes in a week if I wanted to. So I'm definitely aware that's not everyone's situation. But it is, from the buying lens, a lot of it's sort of data based and looking back on historical data and what's sold in the previous season, and then also what's the brand's strategic overview for that model, or their running category, and how they're going to what shoes have they got in their pipeline, what is the whole sort of industry doing. We're sort of probably 12 months ago or 18 months ago, it was max cushion was the big thing. It was which just means the amount of foam sort of in the midsole, and it was every shoe was chunky and soft and big, and now we've sort of seen that come off a little bit, and a lot of brands are bringing, like, re-releasing older models that are sort of a little bit more minimal, which is just that always happens. I mean, it happens in probably most industries, but you definitely see it in running. It comes in ebbs and flows, and people get back into the minimal, lowest profile type shoes, and then the higher stack ones will come back around, and it is a little bit dictated by technology. As there was more developments in foams and uppers, and you could put more foam in a shoe, but not necessarily gain that much more weight in the shoe. So it's all sort of data driven, and then we rely a lot on the staff in store to sort of dictate back to us sort of what they're hearing, what they're seeing, and what people are buying. We definitely pride ourselves on our customer service in store, and sort of we don't, there's other stores that have treadmills and where you can trial shoes and different stuff like that, and we sort of made a point of not wanting to do that. At the end of the day, we're not trained medical professionals, we're not podiatrists and all that sort of stuff. So we definitely look at the sort of training someone's doing, what shoes they've run in the past, what's worked, what hasn't, and very much going off the feel of the customer, while still trying to steer them in the right direction.
So in terms of the running shoes, like you could have your top end racing shoes, your fast training shoes, stability shoes, and then other like niche products. Is there specific shoes that are more suited to specific terrains or types of runs, that maybe you vary week to week? Is there, or is it something that you kind of pick and stick with something that works for you?
Yeah, definitely. There's sort of that max cushion category that I was talking about. There's a lot in that for, say recovery days, your day after a workout or a session, where your legs might be a little bit beaten up and you just want something a bit softer and a bit friendlier on your feet, or something that's going to give you a little bit more energy return. So there's definitely different shoes that you'll wear for different days, depending on sort of how you're structuring your training. And then at the moment, category that's sort of blowing up is the super trainer category, which is essentially those max cushion shoes, but with a brand's top end racing foam, or usually combined with two of their foams, and usually with a carbon plate. So they're sort of like these great big behemoth of shoes, but they've got a carbon plate, and they're sort of it's a really interesting category because it's almost like a training version of a racing shoe. So that's pretty prolific at the moment, which is a really good training tool for people to use that are looking to run their first marathon, or even their 50th. I think they're really good training tools because they just allow the body to recover quicker, perform better, throughout that sort of arduous training process.
You seem really like you're really passionate about what you do with your running, and it's great that you've been able to align those passions through up there athletics and your own running. And but in your early days, you weren't really that passionate about running. You played some team sports at school, but running was never something that was on the cards. You hated going to the athletics carnivals when you were younger. And so what was it that kind of clicked, which I guess flicked the switch and you turned your, I guess, a lot of your pursuits towards long distance running?
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think the school athletics carnival was definitely a dreaded day for me. It was definitely try and take those ones off.
Sicky, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Swimming carnivals was good. We were pretty good swimmers, me and my sisters. So happily take those ones. Yeah, it was interesting. It was never on my radar. And my old dad actually ran a couple of marathons when he was sort of my age or a bit younger. So I don't know, maybe there's something there. But it all sort of started. I was lucky enough to, in 2018, a family friend of ours was living in New York, and his mum, who was a really good family friend of ours, passed away after a long battle with blood cancer, multiple myeloma. And he's done an enormous amount of work in raising money for charity for the foundation that they're involved with, and he, through that foundation, got offered a couple of spots to run New York Marathon. They opened up a certain number of spots for charity runners, and it's a really good way. I mean, anyone out there that's trying to get into one of the major marathons in the world, a charity spot is a really good way to do it, without having to enter the ballot with 800,000 other people. There's a prerequisite of a minimum amount of money you need to raise, and once you raise that, your spot's locked in. So I was lucky enough to do that, and I mean, when he asked me about it, it was sort of one of those once in a lifetime situations. At that time, I'd never really thought about running a marathon, but I thought, tick that one off the bucket list, and sort of
It really raised the bar, right? It's like going to New York. You can't really say no. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
Exactly. It's like it's one of those things where people, someone might enter the ballot 10 years in a row and not get a spot. So couldn't really turn that one down. And then so sort of started training for that. I mean, the training, looking back on it now, wasn't anything flash. And but got there and got it done. And that was sort of I guess the catalyst that sparked it. I got back from that and to the best of my recollection, just sort of kept training and kept running, and signed up to the marathon the next year. And yeah, the ball just sort of kept rolling.
Yeah, I understand you just downloaded the Nike Run app and you kind of just followed along with the prompts, like what it was telling you to do each week, which is similar
Yeah.
what I did. I think the Sydney half marathon, they had like a training program that they released, and it was like a 20-week structured program. It had like different intervals throughout it, rest periods, and then like a graded progression in terms of distance. And also minimal race nutrition. So I think you kind of had to learn the hard way, didn't you? And I guess whenever you learn through what goes wrong, you tend to don't forget that for the rest of your running career or whatever endeavor you're in. So tell us about some of those big mistakes you made and how they helped you to get to where you are now.
Yeah, definitely. I think the New York was incredible, and I think I probably owe a lot to just the naivety of it. I don't think I knew what I was getting myself into, or anything like that, which I think was fantastic. I mean, if you could get that naivety back again, it was something special. So New York was an amazing experience, and I went into that very blind, not knowing the course, not knowing anything about race nutrition or anything like that. And then sort of once I signed up to Melbourne the next year, that's when the wheels really fell off, because I was, sort of finished New York in 3 hours 30. And then I was like, signed up for Melbourne the next year and was like, oh, I'll take, I'll take some chunk of time off that easy. And definitely got ahead of myself at Melbourne, and went into that with, from memory, no race nutrition, I don't think. And just had a horrible time. A royal blow up up around the town in Melbourne, which anyone that's run Melbourne Marathon knows it's a pretty heinous part of the course. They really throw a curveball late. It's about 35K deep, and you go up around a few hills, and yeah, it was like a war zone. So I definitely made some mistakes there. And I think the nutrition thing is, nutrition and eating is really interesting for people that are getting into running and distance running, because I think a lot of people, or probably the majority of people, underestimate just how much you need to eat to fuel for the amount you're actually burning day to day.
Yep.
It's incredible. Lucky enough, my coach has been to the Olympics for marathon running, and she sort of shared with me what protocol she got put on for what she should be eating in the lead up. And just the sheer amount of food is just incredible. And that's just to sort of fuel you. That's not to go in excess. So I think that's probably the biggest mistake that a lot of people make. And then, I mean, that's around the training, and then the fueling during training is sort of just a whole nother thing in itself. Once you start getting serious about it, and gels and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. In terms of what the literature says, around 10 to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. Now, when I was carb loading for the Newcastle Marathon last year, I tried that 10 to 12 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight. Now, this is a very different circumstance to me, say, carbing up for a bodybuilding competition. But for 107 kilos, I was doing 10 to 12 grams of carbs, which was a shit ton of rice and pasta and crumpets, and nearly felt sick after it. And so, yeah, I think maybe fat adaptation for running next time, if I do like a longer event or a like a ultra marathon, might be the smarter option to sustain like a long period of time. But what protocol did you use, or do you use for carbing up before your marathons, and I guess intra nutrition as well? So like, do you use gels, sports drinks? What's your kind of approach with nutrition?
I've had a bit of it's probably been the biggest thing in my marathon journey that I've had to sort of experiment with and work out what works for me. There's been a few times where it hasn't really worked out. Initially, yeah, I started doing pretty much the same protocol, the 10 to 12 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight, and you sort of use anything you can find to make up those calories. And usually, I mean, we eat a pretty good diet as it is. So what would end up happening is I'd get to taper time or get to the carb load, and I'd be filling up on, all sorts of stuff that I wouldn't usually be eating, whether that be, snakes or sports drinks or what have you. And it's, I mean, once you break it down, it sort of makes sense as to why it didn't work, because your body is not used to those foods, and all of a sudden you're cramming it down, in big volumes. So I sort of learned the hard way during a couple marathons that I'd start getting a stitch. There was one I actually DNF'd at Gold Coast Marathon in would have been 2022, I think. I got a really bad stitch quite early, about 3K in. So I made it to 30K, which was just pretty much making it back to where the bags were located, and then pulled the pin. So there's been a few marathons where I've had to sort of experiment as to what works best in terms of the carb load and stuff. And what I've landed on is that the carb load doesn't really work for me. And this isn't to say that this would work for everyone else. It's very much a what works for you situation. There's no sort of one shoe fits all. So I mean, what works for me is just upping the volume that I'm eating, ensuring that I'm, snacking, bigger meals. So just eating more of what I usually eat. I've sort of found that works better for me. And then fueling appropriately with gels throughout the race. I think going into a race feeling a bit lighter, feeling a bit better on the start line works better for me, rather than going in having spent the last 48 hours filling up on carbs and just feeling a bit stodgy and a bit heavy. So that's been a bit of a process to work that out. And it's not a fun process, because you spend all this time training for a marathon. You don't want to get to the start line, and the food's the one thing that undoes you.
Is it similar to strength and physique sports? I see a lot of competitors, and you see this professionals as well, and they eat a certain way, they fuel their body and train in a certain way, all the way up to, say, a couple of weeks out from the competition. And then all of a sudden they drastically change certain things. So they might manipulate water, sodium, carbohydrate intake, their training, maybe they taper off their resistance training or cardio. So is it similar? Do you find a similar thing with endurance aerobic sport like marathon running, where you see a lot of these athletes performing really well in training, great times, their nutrition's on point, and then say a week or two out, they do excessive carb loads, or they play around with different supplements, and this kind of throws off their race, or they get those gastrointestinal issues come race day?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head, and that's pretty much exactly what happened to me. You're performing great during training. You're knocking out all these big sessions, eating what you're eating and fueling the way you're fueling, and then you almost get trapped into this into the fanfare of the carb load and the hype of the carb load, and I think particularly for amateur runners, it's sort of not that feasible. Like it's very different for elite runners when they've got nutritionists, all that sort of stuff, and at the end of the day they do it for a living. So it is, I think that's pretty much what happened to me, and it's just working out what best works for you and your body, because at the end of the day everyone's different, and everyone's body performs on different levels of fuel and different fuels. So it's just putting in the time to work out what works best for you, and sort of not taking too much take notice of what other people are doing and advice people are giving you, but definitely not taking it as gospel.
So I guess some practical strategies for the listeners. I understand you're coached by Ellie Pashley. In the context of nutrition, if you had to break things down into a few key points, perhaps there's some specific foods or supplements that might work best. What would you recommend for any of the listeners that are going into marathon running or some more of those endurance events?
I'd say sort of during training, like gels. I use Morton and Precision Fuel and Hydration. Sort of chop and change between those two, and that would be during a long run, sort of every 6 to 8 k. I'll have a gel. So I mean, it can get expensive for people if you're throwing down 3 or 4 gels every Sunday. They're not the cheapest things, but there's that, and then I mean, there's also a lot of alternatives out there. A lot of people don't enjoy the texture of a gel or a flavor of a gel. There's a lot of brands that offer like blocks,
Right.
like carb chews and different things like that. Or there's carb mix. If you're lucky enough to have someone on a bike with you, or you're doing a looped circuit, carb drinks are a good way to get the carbs in without actually having to sort of eat something. So there's sort of a few different options there, and usually a combination of a few work pretty well. And I mean, even you don't necessarily have to go down the path of official sports nutrition, particularly as an amateur. Like a few snakes in a Ziploc bag can sort of have the same effect as a gel, because it's that carb hit, it's that sugar hit. So there's definitely a bunch of different ways you can go about it. And again, it's just working out what works best for you. If you love having a steak on a bun, then why not do that? And then I guess pre and post, I usually electrolytes are massive pretty much after every run, just to get your sweat levels under control and get your hydration back on track. I think particularly for amateurs that say you're training for an hour, 90 minutes to 2 hours in the morning before going for a 8 to 10 hour workday. I think it's super important just to get back to your baseline post training before starting your workday. So I usually use some form of protein shake after a workout day or long run day, just to sort of, and that'll be pretty much straight after. Have that, then it sort of takes the pressure off having to slam breakfast down as quick as you can. So usually that, some electrolytes, and then breakfast, just to get yourself back on level pegging and actually be functional during the day. Not be going out and running 20 Ks and then just having what you would normally have for brekkie. You're going to be in deficit already, and that's just going to increase throughout the day, and it's going to be pretty hard to remain productive and and be your normal self when you're already a couple steps behind.
Do you think that maybe sometimes we over fixate on different considerations around, say, nutrition? For instance, I spoke to Dean Gardner in the last episode, and he's a 9-time Molokai ocean paddling world champion. And he was saying how when he's on the trip over to Hawaii, he just grabs some Gatorade bottles and he'll throw them in his craft for the race. Now, I know there's a lot of research around multiple transportable carbohydrates. So having gels where there's a combination of, say, glucose and another form of, say, sucrose. So you upregulate the amount of carbohydrate you're getting into your muscles as much as possible. So there is some literature and research around that. Do you think that as you progress with your running, you're going to come to a point where there's just fractional margins of changes and adjustments you can make to get that extra 1%, that this will become more of a strategy that you utilize?
Yeah, definitely. I think as you go on, and the more, whether in marathons or any other endurance sport, it's that the diminishing returns theory. When you start, you're knocking slabs of time off your PBs every race you do, and it's life's good. And then you sort of do get to a bit of a plateau where you're looking to take off, 30 seconds or a minute, and you might go, half a dozen or a dozen races without doing that. So it definitely gets to a point where you are looking for those sort of marginal gains. And I mean, I wouldn't say someone at my level, I don't think I'm at the point of marginal gains and 1%ers like that. I think more than happy to sort of leave that to the elite athletes and guys that do it for a living. But I think it's definitely
pretty modest comment, I think.
I think it's, and it's definitely stuff you think about though. It goes through your head of particularly at the tail end of the training block. You know, what little things can you do, whether it's, you know, extra bit of sleep, you know, just those small little things.
Yeah. So you mentioned precision fuel and nutrition. I understand that Up There Athletics is a massive supplier of those supplements. And I think Andy, who's the owner of Precision Nutrition, you have a lot to say about this, but essentially the supplements, they tailor to each individual's needs, whether it be the sodium content within those supplements. I think that's quite a unique business model. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and the work they're doing with Up There Athletics?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we've so Precision, we've sort of stocked them for probably 12 months now. And they're doing some fantastic stuff in that space. I think just their range of products is fantastic. Like you said, they sort of have different in their electrolytes. They have different sodium levels. You know, 1500, 1000, and 500, just depending on your sweat rate and that sort of stuff. And then they obviously offer the gels and the carb chews and the carb drink mix and stuff like that. So yeah, they're doing heaps in the space, and they've definitely become pretty popular sort of over the last little while, particularly in Australia, which is cool to see. So, and I've personally sort of only started taking them recently as well. I was usually would stick to Morton, but sort of started experimenting with them in the lead up to Vienna Marathon in April, and was really happy with them. So sort of now do a mixture of both, which is cool. And then yeah, I've been having their electrolyte tablets for a while now, which are fantastic. And they actually do these electrolyte capsules, which are really good, which are just a little cap that you swallow, which is just a pretty efficient way just to boost your electrolytes sort of daily or after a workout or something, without having to sort of have another liquid drink. Whereas if you're having a electrolyte drink, a protein shake, and water as well, you got a fair bit of fluids going in.
Do you use the sodium tablets? Is that something you've utilized in?
I haven't in the past. I've definitely thought about it. I know some people do, but I haven't. The closest I've got is I've used sort of NODOs or caffeine tablets in the past. Sort of
that
pre-race
glucose sparing kind of effect with the
caffeine.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think I really noticed too much of a difference. You know, I think a strong coffee will do it for me.
Yeah. That's one of those top echelon kind of evidence-based supplements, really, like caffeine-based supplements, creatine, so forth. Moving forward, I guess, into the London Marathon. How many marathons have you run now? It'd be around about half a dozen or so.
Yeah, I think it's. I think I've started 8, finished 7.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
And so with London, I understand the track there is quite a fast. It's quite a fast course. Tell us a little bit about how early you got over there and how your preparation was for running, which I think is your quickest time to date, 2 hours, 31 minutes. So
yeah,
talk us through some of the intricacies of your preparation, I guess, taking a step back and looking at it from a perspective of, say, a 20-week program building up to the event, but then also your race day nutrition and the week leading in.
Yeah, it's running international marathons is really interesting, and sometimes it's a bit of a necessity when you're in Australia and you're trying to run quick times, because there is a limited number of marathons around that are sort of have quick enough courses, and I mean, everyone wants to get over and run majors, and I see it as a pretty good way to holiday as well, if you can tie a marathon into it. But in terms of the lead up, like me and my training partner Liam, like we sort of maintain a pretty high base level of Ks. So which sort of makes it a little bit easy when you are going into a marathon block, because it doesn't mean you need to dial it up from 0 100. You're already at 80. You just need to add sort of that little bit extra specific marathon based training towards the end of the block, sort of just increasing your load and tweaking what sessions you're doing, and then increasing your long runs and getting some bigger stuff in towards the end of the block. So it was sort of business as usual throughout the lead up. I was actually lucky enough to get into London through New Balance, and the contacts got there through the store, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it was pretty stock standard build up, and then sort of as you get closer, it would be great if we all had the luxury of pro athletes to be able to go over, and be on location 2 weeks prior to the race, fully acclimatized, all that sort of stuff. But obviously we've all got jobs and the days leading up to a marathon, you're not really doing much. So you don't want to go and burn 2 weeks of annual leave sitting in a hotel room. But I sort of find the ideal time for me is if you can arrive in the destination on the Wednesday before a Sunday race. That's sort of, for me, that's sort of the minimum, just to be able to get, as you know, coming from Australia, it takes you a few days to even get over the flight, let alone to start feeling normal again. So yeah, sort of 3 days for me is sort of the sweet spot. If you can get there on the Wednesday at some stage during the day, sort of go for a jog off the plane, and then and try and get back into some normal sleeping habits. And then that sort of gives you 2 or 3 days of jogging around just to acclimatize to whether it's climate or, like I said, get over the flight and stuff like that. And even just to sort out your nutrition and your food and all that sort of stuff. Obviously being in a foreign country, being in London was pretty easy. But, once you start going to other countries where cuisine might be different, it's just sort of about working out where you're getting your food from. If you are in a house or an apartment, do you need to go buy groceries and find the right groceries? Or if you're in a hotel, you're eating out. All sort of, I guess they're sort of some of those 1%ers to consider when you are traveling for a marathon. And was sort of beneficial, the fact that I wasn't doing that massive carb load, because then I didn't need to be super organized and, find all the right food when I was over there. I could sort of just eat, ad hoc like I normally would, but just eat a bit more. So I think that was super beneficial. It just sort of relieved a little bit of the stress of having to find and prepare, the right amount of food based on the right quantities. So we went over with a couple of friends of ours and stayed in a house together, which was great. It was super relaxed, and then it was actually not terrible weather, but it was raining and pretty gloomy, which is pretty stock standard for London.
For London, yeah, I was going to say.
So and then I think it's also a bit of a later start to what we're used to here. I don't think we started till 9 or 10 o'clock, which feels a bit weird in the morning. You're sort of getting up and it's
normally they start around 6 or 7 a.m. right?
Yeah.
You're done by about 10 or 11, or for people who are a bit slower like me, but
which is a weird time of the day to be done, because you sort of feel like you should be, I don't know, going to the pub to celebrate or something, but you've got a few hours before they even open. And London sort of starts out of London a bit. So you jump on the train with everyone else and you head out there to the start line, and you're in a big paddock, and incredibly well organized event. I think it's still probably one of the most well organized marathons I've done, just in terms of logistics and bag drop and different stuff like that. So, but you do sort of feel a bit like herded animals when you're at the start line, because you're in a big pen. And you're just in like a grass field, and it was a bit soggy and a bit wet, and people sort of start warming up, but they start jogging in circles. So you get this weird like looking like farm animals jogging around in a circle.
It was like the Sydney,
um,
Sydney half marathon. Everyone was packed right there, just underneath the bridge, basically in North Sydney, and there was 10 portaloos and crowds and lineups of about 30, 40 people, and you're all huddled together. There's people trying to run
yeah.
around the start line. It's a new experience for me. And I think it's the same, I imagine, for New York and London. What's it like running overseas? What's the culture like? I know that you did New York in 2018, which was kind of just before COVID hit, before the imagine there was a bit more of a running boom internationally. But what's it like over there compared to Australia?
I think it's like, I think I touched on it earlier. Like Melbourne's culture is very comparable, but I think it's just on a smaller scale. I think just the volume of people, particularly in New York, the density of the population around Manhattan and Brooklyn and stuff allows there to be so many different, well-established and sizable running crews or running clubs. And so the same in London. Whereas Melbourne, it's like there are heaps in Melbourne, but just because of the population and the, I guess, the sprawl of the population, it doesn't seem as dense. But they sort of, there's definitely a different model in the States and in the UK around like traditional track clubs,
Right.
which don't really exist here. You go to the States and every high school has a 400-meter running track. Whereas in Melbourne, it's like, you're pretty few and far between actual running tracks that you can go and train on. And obviously they do, in the States, they do track and field at school and at college, and it's sort of a big thing. And so as a flow on from that, there's clubs, there's Brooklyn Track Club where you go and you pay money at the start of the season and you go and you run track and you run track workouts. And those are very different to sort of your run crews that meet up and do workouts together, which is sort of a bit of the new age type stuff. So it's really interesting. And I think a lot of influences in Melbourne have come from New York and from London, which is really cool to see. And it's cool from an up their athletics point of view, is we have obviously a lot of exposure to that, and it's cool to, when you're over there, for those to meet people that you might have been interacting with on the internet, or you see them doing cool stuff in running culture, and it's nice to meet up with them and do things sort of that that close the gap a bit between us and those major cities.
Absolutely. A typical running week for you leading into a marathon, you said you go through 7 pairs of shoes per week, or you rotate through 7 pairs of shoes. Just how many kilometers do you get through on a weekly basis? And I guess what's the frequency of your sessions and amount of volume you get through your legs?
So during a marathon block, like sort of in the thick of it, it'd be somewhere between 150, 160 Ks a week. And then breaking down that week would be, the start of the week's pretty much just mileage and sort of recovering from what would have been a big Sunday workout. And then most days early in the week, sort of Monday to Wednesday, be one run on Monday, and then the rest of the week will be sort of 2 runs a day. And second run of the day is usually 6K or half an hour, just in the afternoon, which just helps. It's sort of pretty hard to get the volume up there without doing doubles. And then workouts during a marathon block are Thursday and Sunday. Sort of a big workout Thursday morning, which will be sort of marathon specific stuff. Usually ends up being somewhere between 22 to 24K, sort of all up with warm up and cool down. Then the next workout will be Sunday, which the way we structure things is Sunday's a long run day, but with a workout. So the way that would look is it might be like 20K easy at the start, and then you sort of get back, put your race shoes on, and you might do, 5x3K or some sort of workout at the end of after the 20K, which the purpose of that is just to get used to running at marathon pace on tired legs. And that's been super beneficial, I think, since I started doing that sort of training a couple of years ago. Pretty much noticed the difference straight away. I think it's super beneficial rather than, and I don't know, getting out for 35K just jogging can be pretty arduous, whereas you go and run 22K easy and then put a workout in at the end. It definitely helps pass the time. So that's sort of what a typical week looks like, and the actual runs that make up the mileage around that are broken into, if it's the day after a workout, it'll just be sort of very light jogging, anywhere from 4:30 to 5-minute Ks, and then the other days are might be a little bit quicker, but still very much just jogging. Trying not to hit, it's sort of a grey area that everyone talks about. Sort of trying not to dip into that, where you end up running the majority of mileage in this grey area that's not quite a workout and not quite a session, but also not quite jogging. And you're not allowing your body to recover, and you're also not gaining any fitness from it. So you're just in this sort of strange limbo where you're not fully recovering, and it's not a good place to be. So I think ensuring that you're running your easy runs and your recovery runs like super easy.
What role does threshold training or speed work and, recovery play in your training program, and there's specific protocols that you implement? I know, for instance, we've talked a little bit on the show about like cryotherapy or ice baths as a good way to reduce inflammation. What techniques have you used, and how do you recover after a big Sunday distance run?
For a while there, I was doing ice baths on Sundays. Sunday afternoons, my old gym that I was at had ice baths, which you could use, and I was doing it with a mate. And I think ice is probably one of those things that, some people love it and some people don't. I think it's a bit of a personal preference type thing. I sort of really enjoyed it and felt like I got the benefit from it, whether that was placebo or not. Who knows? And then other than that, it's sort of, sleep. You sort of can't give enough credit to how much of a role sleep plays in recovering from that sort of stuff, particularly, if you've got the luxury to be able to have a nap on a Sunday after a long run, or making sure you're getting your 8 to 10 hours a night. So I think that plays a massive role. Outside of that, I don't really do too much. Lucky enough to have a pair of recovery boots, which again, jury's sort of still out on the science and if they work, but if you strip it all back, it forces you to sit down for half an hour and do nothing. So, even if that's the benefit, that's pretty good.
Yeah, we talked about that. I talked to one gentleman who ran from Perth to Sydney, and early in the podcast, Troy, and he was talking about how he used the Normatec boots throughout his journey, and if it's a placebo effect and he feels like it's helping him, well, that's that's enough to kind of assist him. And as you say, like just that time to sit down and recover. Oftentimes when I'm using the Normatec boots, I use that time to do some mindfulness as well. So I guess there's other strategies that it forces you to sit there and focus on your breathing, and maybe potentially do some other forms of recovery work, like using a Theragun or whatever it may be. Something that, as you say, the jury's still out, but these techniques, if there is a placebo effect, I imagine there's some usefulness or proxy for those in training and in theory. So on that topic of mindfulness, how do you mentally prepare for these long distance events? I think, as you talked about at the start, it's nice when you're quite naive coming into your first event and you really don't know what's ahead of you and it's all unknown. And oftentimes that's the adrenaline kind of gets you through. But now that you're an experienced runner, you understand what it takes physically and mentally to endure these events. How do you prepare yourself mentally? What techniques do you use? And how can others listening maybe integrate this into their own training?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think when I um, sort of didn't finish that marathon in the Gold Coast, I think a lot of that there was a few factors, but I think I was definitely in my head a bit too much about that. Found myself on the morning of trying to find mindfulness podcasts, and that's never done that before. So I think there's a red flag in itself. So there's probably not techniques that I use that I stick to 100%. I think it's a bit of a cliche, but the whole trust in the training is super beneficial, and just looking back on the work you've done in the leader is super beneficial, and just having and trusting the process that you've gone through. Outside of that, there's not too many specific techniques that I use. I think leading up and during the race, it's always super beneficial for me to break the race down into portions. Usually break it down into sort of 5K blocks, and know what time you need to hit for that 5K to hit your goal time. So then at any given time, just making sure you're focusing on just that 5K, not the next one, not the one after that, or not K40. You're just focusing on that 5K and hitting that split, and then once that rolls over, it's like, all right, back to zero. Just focus on this 5K. That's been really, really beneficial for me in terms of breaking the race up and not getting too far ahead of myself. And then, I think riding the waves is another thing that I keep in mind. Like, you're never going to feel, some people might, if you have a really good race, but you're never going to feel incredible or 100%, every kilometer of a marathon. And I think it's just having awareness in how your body's feeling and how your mind's feeling, that there's going to be good and bad patches. You might feel amazing right now, and doesn't mean you need to step on the gas because you think you're running too slow because you're feeling too good. And then on the contrary, there's times when you're going to feel, like rubbish, but the chances are you're going through a rough patch, and that's going to pass. So I think reminding yourself that there's going to be ebbs and flows, there's going to be good and bad. And you sort of just got to ride the waves and just take them as they are. And not, if you are going through a rough patch, not throwing in the towel. You might have dropped, 10 seconds per K for the last few Ks. It's super important to remain positive, and knowing that bad patch will pass, and you'll probably, start feeling good again, in 15 minutes. And it's really important not to just, throw in the towel then and get too caught up in those feelings and how you're feeling.
Yeah, imagine if there's some people listening here who are kind of amateur level distance running. A lot of the time it's just about finishing the marathon. But for those that have done a few marathons and they're starting to sort of look at PRs and trying to beat their previous best time, what's your advice for like pacing strategies, particularly in those really important periods of the run, like the middle miles and the final push? Do you use simply looking at your GPS unit? Like what monitor do you use? And do you look at, say, kilometers splits or over specific distances?
Yeah, I use a Coros GPS watch, which is just a similar to a Garmin, but just a different brand. And I don't like every K split. I can't do it. It just mentally it just becomes a bit tiresome. So I do like I said, like to do those 5K splits and just have a setting set that'll give me a notification at 5K and tell me the time. But in saying that, I probably recommend going off the timing and the K markers that are on the course, because at the end of the day, they've been measured. GPSs, can be off at times, particularly over an extended distance like that. So for me, like knowing the split I need to hit for that 5K, and then going off the timing and the K markers they have on course, is always beneficial. In terms of pacing, I think, I mean, one of the biggest mistakes, and I've definitely made it before, is trying to bank time in the marathon. It very, very rarely works. Trying to go out a bit quicker and get a few minutes under your belt in the first half will 9 times out of 10 bite you in the ass in the second half. And it changes the experience you have in the marathon depending on how you run it. And obviously everyone would love to run a marathon where you're cruising for the first half, gets a little bit tough towards the end, and pick it up. Everyone wants to run a negative split, and trying to run as even as possible across the 2 halves of the race is going to give you a far better experience than blowing up at the end, which can get pretty hard.
Yeah. So you talked about the Gold Coast where you DNF. So you didn't finish that one due to gastrointestinal issues with your prep. And then you talked there about how there were times where you tried to bank time and go out a bit harder and faster with your initial splits. What are your biggest learnings or challenges that you've faced with marathon running? And what have you learned to overcome those that could potentially help some of the listeners as well with their own running endeavors?
I think the nutrition thing has been massive for me, and I think, as I said, it's just been a bit of a process of working out what works for me, and understanding that it isn't one size fits all, and that what works for someone else or an elite athlete that you might follow and might idolize might not work for you. I think that's been super beneficial. The banking of time thing, and just running your own race. It's very easy to get, particularly in these big races with a lot of people, it's very easy to get caught up in, racing other people or trying to keep up with a different pace group. I think it's super important to run your own race. You've done all your own training, so why get to race day and try and run someone else's race? And it's obviously a lot easier said than done, but because there are so many other people out there. But if you can just sort of stay in your own race, run your own pace, I think that's super beneficial.
So what are the biggest mistakes that a lot of beginners make in your experience that you see, and how can they correct those?
I think that the time goal thing has always interested me. It's obviously 3 hours is a massive goal when you get a lot of groundswell of people trying to hit that sub 3 hours, and I think it can be a little bit to some people's detriment sometimes. It's obviously fantastic to have goals and have something to aim towards, but I think it does put a lot of undue pressure on you, and then all of a sudden you're running, you might run a 3:01, and then you're disappointed. It's like, you just ran a 3-hour marathon, so things can't be too bad. But it does change the mindset you have, that all of a sudden you see that 3:01 as a failure, whereas if you were 60 seconds down the road, it'd be a great success. So I've always found that really interesting, and I would probably contradict myself a bit there, because I do am trying to run times myself and all that sort of stuff. But it's not a mistake from some people, but I think people can get too caught up in what the time means, and I think it's important to strip it back to the fact that you just ran a marathon, an hour and a half faster than what most people average would.
Kind of distracts you from enjoying the pursuit, which was what it was all about. I recently listened to a podcast with Lane Norton. I'm not sure if you know who Lane Norton is, but he's a PhD, and he's a powerlifter, involved in physique sports, and is involved with a lot of communications with a lot of these different publications around, bodybuilding and strength and so forth. Has a website, BioLane. very influential in the space, but he was talking on a podcast recently about this one gentleman who was a natural bodybuilder and had terrible genetics for competing natural bodybuilding, some of the worst genetics. And he managed to work his ass off to get to a point where he was at, say, the Natural World Championships, and ended up coming third and was completely dejected. And he was talking about how, for a lot of people, they were so excited for him and heaped a lot of praise on him, and it was a remarkable achievement. But for him, he was really depressed. It said that, all I wanted was first, and to get this is like a disappointment, that kind of thing. And he said it's quite a miserable existence if you end up like that. I think that you really want to, as much as you want to continue to improve, you want to be able to enjoy the process, don't you? And that seems like something you're doing at the moment with your running, which is great.
Yeah, I think it's probably a realization I came to with that whole diminishing returns thing, is that, I might not run any quicker over my next, 5 or 6 marathons. And that's an adjustment in your mindset, knowing that, you got to put in the work, and you go and you might give it your best shot, but you might fall a little bit short, but still finding enjoyment in the process and in the race itself, regardless of the outcome, I think is really important.
Post race, when you're moving out of the race, you've just finished, nutritionally, we talked about 10 to 12 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight initially when you're carb loading for the race is one of those strategies which is kind of grounded in the evidence. For recovery, what's your philosophy there? What are the guidelines, and how do people replenish their glycogen stores after a big marathon?
Post race, I think it's anything and everything. Really, I think the rules sort of go out the window, and I think as they should. I think you should be able to let your hair down and celebrate
Yep.
as you want to, if that's at the pub, if it's out for dinner, if it's what have you, if it's junk food, if it's whatever it is. I think I've found it really beneficial for myself to just release the pressure valve a little bit. Even from a mental standpoint, because I can get quite caught up and quite rigid in the whole process. And
I guess it's not like football or soccer where you got to bounce back the next week. So alcohol and that kind of thing. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I post marathon, traditionally I will have 2 weeks off completely from running, and that's as much mental as it is physical. I think after my most recent one, I was back running reasonably quickly because I sort of needed to, because I was doing some work stuff, and physically you can get back into it, but I think mentally it's like just to have 2 weeks to not have to get up at whatever time to go for a run, to go out for dinner, to sort of eat what you want. I think that's as beneficial as anything you can do, just to reset.
Do you struggle having periods off? I know that if I went, say, like a month after doing a competition, or say, it's hard for me to stay away from the gym because it's one of those things you're very passionate about. Do you struggle to rest or stay off your feet for those couple of weeks there after the marathon?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think a week I'm usually pretty good, and then you sort of get the itch again in that second week. Yeah, definitely struggle to do it. I think when you're doing it every day, it becomes so habitual, and it's so routine oriented, and it dictates how you feel throughout the day. Then you don't do it, and you notice it so much.
Yeah. What's ahead for you, Patrick, with your marathon running? What goals do you have in front of you? And are there any specific times or targets you're aiming for? I think that London marathon that you did, say a couple of years back now, or a year or so ago now, there was a 2:01, which is pretty close to a world record, almost sub 2 hours. So, like, for anyone listening, where you're at seems like it's an exceptionally close time to say like a world record. But what's your goals for coming up for like times and splits that you're aiming for?
So for the last few marathons, sort of that sub 2:30 has been the goal, and I think it's there. I just haven't been able to put it all together on the day. So I think that's the immediate goal. I think I can, depending on what races are coming up and what my running looks like over the next little while, I think I can definitely go quicker than that. But I'm being quite deliberate in not thinking beyond that sort of 2:30 mark. I just like to knock that off first, and then sort of see what comes next. But I mean, as we touched on earlier, it's family life at the moment is definitely taking precedence. So I'm being quite determined not to make any grand plans at the moment. Just trying to enjoy life as it is at the moment, and still running, and been lucky enough to fit it in around everything, but definitely not entering any races or have any grand plans at the moment. So definitely taking it sort of 1 week at a time.
Are there any other aspects of fitness or running that you're passionate about exploring in the future or achieving, say like an ultra marathon or maybe some shorter distance running?
The ultra marathon thing has never really interested me. I sort of have always thought that 42 Ks is enough, and I'll just try and run that as fast as possible. And then I've sort of done through training and whatnot. I've done some shorter stuff, 3K, 5K, and that sort of stuff, which I think is super beneficial for marathon running itself, particularly as you get older. Usually your first thing to go is that sort of top end speed. So if you can maintain that top end speed, I think it's really it sort of goes hand in hand, as counterintuitive as it sounds, with marathon running. Other than that, there sort of isn't too much. I do strength-based stuff is sort of part of the routine as well, and it's been I think it's been really beneficial to my marathon running is getting in the gym 2 or 3 days a week as well, and not spending hours in there, but just doing some heavy primary movements just really help with the strength-based stuff of marathon running. I definitely recommend that to anyone that's getting into it, is not to neglect the strength stuff.
So when you say the strength stuff, I imagine you're saying higher intensity resistance training with lower rep ranges. So I guess a lot of people probably listening would think to do some marathon running, you would want to prioritize muscular endurance training in the lower limbs. So like the quadriceps, glutes, hamstrings at higher rep ranges. They would think that's more probably specific to the nature of endurance running. Why do you do, I guess, lower rep range, higher intensity strength training as opposed to endurance resistance training? Or is it a combination, kind of a hybrid between the two? And how do you program that?
I sort of see it as if you look at running is essentially high repetition, high intensity, aerobic, anaerobic, that sort of stuff. So I think it's important to complement it with the opposite, and to make sure you're not just adding more stress and more high intensity onto your running program. And I'm by no means a professional in this, and my mate who is a physio, who I was going to the gym with, he sort of helped me with this stuff, and it's all very basic, and like you said, it is all lower limbs and core based stuff. It's very basic movements. It's squatting, it's deadlifting, a lot of single leg stuff, obviously, because of the force that running puts through each single leg, and it's sort of 3 reps of 8, and getting pretty heavy. And I think I don't exactly know the science behind it all, but I think that how it is, I guess, the opposite of what running is, in terms of the energy systems and all that sort of stuff, makes sense in my head, at least.
Yeah. So from a specificity standpoint, sled pushing, Bulgarian split squats, what are your go-to resistance exercises for transfer from the gym into your running performance?
Usually, yeah, like I said, it's super simple. It's like squatting, Romanian deadlifts, split squats, single leg deadlifts,
Yep.
and then like glute bridges and stuff like that. So it's all focusing around those sort of prime movers. And you might throw in an upper body something there, so you're just not wasting away too much.
And you use a lot of supersets. Like, what are the rest periods between sets? Do you tend to do shorter rest periods, or is it your typical strength protocol where you're resting anywhere between 3 to 6 minutes per set?
I think I get myself in trouble sometimes because I do superset a lot of the time and cut recovery, but that purely comes from like a time restraint point of view. I don't enjoy spending hours in the gym, so it's I'm very much trying to get in and out, which is contrary to what I was saying earlier about it not becoming a high intensity exercise. But that, yeah, I think that just lends itself to doing it on your spare time and that sort of stuff, and just trying to think of a night.
If you had to choose only one marathon you could run for the rest of your life, which one would it be?
One that I've already run.
Just any. You could pick any across the world. They say one that you've done, that's fine. But if you could only pick one for the rest of your life, I was actually thinking about this in the context of a question we had on our other podcast, Strength Connect, with Brandon Kempter and Luke Tulloch. But we asked them if you could pick 10 exercises to build a program around, and that was all you could use for the rest of your life. What 10 exercises would you pick to develop a well-rounded program? But I thought to gear this more towards marathon running, if you had to pick one course across the world that you could do for the rest of your life, which one would it be and why?
I haven't run it yet, but I think it would be, at the moment, would be Berlin Marathon. I think it's so steeped in history, and it's renowned as one of the fastest in the world, and there's been so many world records broken there. Yeah, I think it's definitely high on my to-do list, and I think it would be, yeah, it'd be pretty incredible to do.
Awesome. Where can our listeners find you on social media, Patrick, and also Up There Athletics, if you want to just promote their pages for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So Up There Athletics, we've got a online store, is upthereathletics.com, and at Up There Athletics on Instagram. And the store is located in the CBD, so 179 Flinders Lane in Melbourne. And then, personally, it's Patrick Up There on Instagram.
So before I let you go, Pat, just got a segment where I'll get you to add one of your favorite songs. Maybe it's something you're listening to at the moment, to the NORMLESS playlist. People can download this on Spotify and listen to it. It's basically a culmination of all of our guests, one song from each of our guests.
Yeah.
So what have you been listening to, mate? Or what's something that yeah. Imagine music could be a big one for you as a marathon runner.
Funny enough, it's not actually, a lot of people don't have a go at me when I say this, but I don't actually listen to anything when I train at all, which people find a little bit strange. But unless I'm on the treadmill, I do find the treadmill pretty boring.
I was going to do the marathon down on the south coast. I think it was down in Nowra. But they in the rules for the actual marathon, you weren't allowed to listen to music. So I wonder why that is. But yeah.
I might go with Weather With You by Crowded House.
Weather With You. Crowded House. All right. Well, thanks for your time today, Patrick. It was great to hear some of your insights about how you achieve performance in marathon running. Incredible feat you've been able to achieve with the 2 minute 31 marathon, and no doubt in the future, we look forward to seeing you get that sub 2.5 hour And we look forward to seeing more from Up There Athletics. So we'll stay in touch, mate. And thanks again for your time. And hopefully the listeners will appreciate it just as much as I did.
Thank you, mate. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Pat. That was good. Enjoyable.
It was great, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah, really appreciate the chat.
Yeah, just trying to, with these podcasts, just try and make sure that always try and include some tips or strategies from people like yourself that others can integrate, because otherwise I find we just get lost talking. And I think it's always that practical element that people enjoy, which is, how can I take this and apply it to myself? So yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
And I'll edit a lot of the content in the coming days or over the weekend. So you'll probably get tagged in heaps of stuff on Instagram and Facebook and all that, and LinkedIn. Just, you don't feel obliged to share. Just maybe pick and choose if there's things you want to share. That's up to you. But I'll tag
definitely
Up There Athletics and yourself. And so if you want me to send you any of the content or whatever, but I'll email you with the link to Spotify when it's up. And yeah, you can have a listen or share whatever you like. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thanks, mate. And congratulations on your child too. It was really nice to meet you. And we'll stay in touch, hey, as you progress with your running. I'll keep
Definitely.
I'll keep updating the feed as we get, updates. Let me know how you're tracking with things.
Yep. Yeah. Sounds good.
All right, mate. Good to meet you. I'll let you get on with your day.
Right.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, mate. Have a good day.
Yeah, buddy.
Bye.